Enzymes can be found in the alimentary canal and play an important role in digestion as part of nutrition in humans. Nutrition in humans has two routes. The more important route is from ingestion to assimilation. After ingestion, your food will first get digested. There are two forms of digestion: physical digestion, where large pieces of food become smaller to increase the surface area so that chemical digestion by enzymes can be sped up. The end goal of chemical digestion is for nutrient molecules to become small enough to be absorbed. Digestion starts in the mouth. In the mouth, physical digestion takes place thanks to our teeth. Carbohydrate is the only nutrient that gets chemically digested in the mouth, where starch is broken down into maltose by salivary amylase. The esophagus is where food goes after it is swallowed from the mouth. Peristalsis is the contraction and relaxation of the muscles in the alimentary canal that push the bolus towards the next section. Remember, this happens throughout the whole digestive tract. The bolus will then enter the stomach. There, it will be churned by the walls of the stomach. Only protein is digested in the stomach, being chemically broken down into polypeptides by pepsin. Bile and pancreatic juice will be added as the partly digested food is released into the small intestine. Bile is produced in the liver and secreted into the gallbladder. Bile serves as a form of physical digestion for fats. The pancreas produces enzymes, and together with bile, they are released into the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. All three nutrients are fully digested in the duodenum. Starch is broken down to maltose, and maltose to glucose by maltase. Protein is broken down by protease into amino acids. Fat is physically digested by bile into tiny droplets before being broken down by lipase into fatty acids and glycerol. These simple food molecules will then travel into the ileum. This is where absorption takes place. The duodenum and ileum have many folds with villi and microvilli on the villi. The villi are also well supplied with blood capillaries, which drain into the hepatic portal vein to transport all the digested food molecules to the liver. Water, glucose, fatty acids, and glycerol are absorbed through diffusion or active transport in the later part of the ileum. And here are the structural features of the ileum and their functions. The hepatic portal vein transports the digested food from the ileum to the liver. For O-level, you will need to be familiar with these functions of the liver, with extra attention given to the detoxification of alcohol due to its undesirable effects. Alcohol can affect the brain, reduce self-control, and increase reaction time. Alcohol abuse can also damage the liver. That's all for the nutrients that are absorbed. As for the undigested food, it goes into the colon, rectum, and anus, where it is egested out of the body. And here is a summary of the functions of the colon, rectum, and anus.
Unlike the undigested food which exits our body, digested food molecules enter into our transport system. The heartbeat of the transport system in humans is the heart. The heart is always printed in this manner, so you will need to flip the paper facing the front of you if you cannot get the orientation. You will need to know a few blood vessels. Blood will enter the left side of the heart through the pulmonary vein and leave to the rest of the body through the aorta. After circulating the body, the blood will return through the two vena cava before being pumped back to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. There are 4 chambers of the heart, the atria at the top and the ventricles below. The wall of the left ventricle is thicker than the right to exert greater pressure as it has to pump blood to the rest of the body. The heart consists of 4 sets of valves. The bicuspid and tricuspid valves on the left and right sides of the heart respectively, as well as the semilunar valves in the aorta and pulmonary artery. As the bi- and tricuspid valves separate the atria and ventricles, they are collectively known as the AV valves. The function of the valves is to prevent the backflow of blood into the previous chamber. The chordae tendineae are like strings that pull back the AV valves to prevent them from opening backwards into the previous chamber. The median septum separates the left and right chambers, preventing the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. The heartbeat follows a cardiac cycle. We start with relaxation of both the atria and ventricles. Blood from the atria will passively fill the ventricles. Note that the AV valves are already open. The atria will then contract, pumping all the blood into the ventricles. This is followed by ventricular contraction, where the pressure forces the AV valves to close, and after a split second, the semilunar valves will open as blood is pumped out into the aorta and pulmonary artery. After the blood has been pumped out, the ventricles will relax, causing the semilunar valves to close, shortly followed by the opening of the already relaxed atria, as blood passively fills the ventricles, thus continuing the cycle. The pressure of the left side of the heart can be represented by this graph. The important thing is to note the 4 intersections and the events that take place. Just remember, Cocomelon! Close, open, close, open. Since the semilunar valves are on top, the opening and closing at the top are for the semilunar valves. The bicuspid valves are below, so the closing and opening refer to them. This cycle can be interrupted by coronary heart disease. This is the blockage of coronary arteries which supply oxygenated blood to the heart muscles. Remember, the pulmonary vein and vena cava supply blood to the heart chambers, while the coronary arteries supply blood to the heart muscles. With reduced ability to perform aerobic respiration, heart muscle cells are damaged, and this can lead to a heart attack. You will need to know the causes and preventive measures. There are 3 main types of blood vessels: the arteries, which transport blood away from the heart. Remember A for artery, A for away. They have thick, elastic, and muscular walls to withstand high blood pressure. Being elastic, they can recoil and stretch to push the blood along to smaller arteries known as arterioles, which have a higher ratio of muscle to size. This allows them to better control the amount of blood flowing to specific regions. Capillaries do not have muscle, as their walls are 1 cell thick to allow faster diffusion due to the short distance of 1 cell. Blood is then drained into venules and veins, all of which contain valves to prevent the backflow of blood since the pressure is low. Tissue fluid exists between blood capillaries and cells. You will need to know which substances diffuse out and in, as well as the fact that proteins and red blood cells are too large to pass through. Pressure in blood vessels decreases as the blood flows further away from the heart, meaning that the capillaries actually have higher pressure than the veins. The fluctuation in the arteries is due to the contraction and relaxation of the heart. When the ventricles contract, the pressure goes up. When they relax, less pressure is exerted on the artery. And here's the summary comparing the structure, function, and flow in the 3 main groups of blood vessels. You will also need to know the names of a few specific blood vessels. Remember, arteries carry blood away from the heart, while veins carry blood towards it. Pulmonary refers to the lungs, while renal refers to the kidneys. Hepatic refers to the liver. And take note that for the intestine, there is no vein directly returning to the heart. The hepatic portal vein connects it to the liver, and the absorbed food will go to the liver through it. Blood itself has 4 main components. For transport, the responsibility lies with red blood cells and blood plasma. For body defense, there are white blood cells and platelets. Platelets will first form a temporary plug, while causing fibrinogen to be activated into fibrin. Fibrin threads form a mesh which traps red blood cells. White blood cells are responsible for tissue rejection in blood transfusions. Hence, it is important to know who can donate blood to which other blood group. O can donate to everyone, while someone with AB can only donate to AB.
Some of the molecules transported in the transport system are meant for respiration, and the purpose of transporting glucose to the body cells is primarily for aerobic respiration. You will need to know the word and chemical equations of aerobic respiration, and they need to be given in their respective forms when asked. Aerobic respiration requires oxygen to release a large amount of energy. When there is insufficient oxygen, the cells will undergo anaerobic respiration. This happens during high-intensity exercise, such as a short sprint, where the majority of the energy you need actually comes anaerobically. This is because there is insufficient oxygen inhaled and delivered to your muscle cells for the intensity of the muscle contractions.
Small lungs, haha.
The equation is simple, just glucose being broken down into lactic acid, which releases a small amount of energy. When your muscles accumulate lactic acid, it incurs an oxygen debt. Oxygen debt is the amount of additional oxygen needed post-exercise to remove the lactic acid. This is done by breathing faster and having a faster heart rate, even when sitting after exercise. The respiratory system is the system that takes in oxygen. It consists of the following organs. You will have to know that there are cells that secrete mucus and cilia in the trachea, as well as their functions and the 4 structural adaptations of the alveoli. Air is brought in and out of the respiratory system through breathing. The only thing you have to remember is ERIC. For the diaphragm, exhale equals relax and inhale equals contract. For the external and internal intercostal muscles, you will just need to spell out DEI because you do not want to die. The diaphragm and external intercostal muscles relax and contract together, while the internal intercostal muscles do the opposite. Other than that, make yourself a lung model, and you can see that during exhalation, the volume of the cavity decreases and the lungs squeeze the air out, while during inhalation, the volume of the cavity and lungs expands as air fills the lungs. On exhalation, as long as you remember ERIC and have the lung model, there isn't much you need to memorize. The only thing you should take note of is the last point where air is forced out, instead of saying the air flows out. For inhalation, everything is reversed and air is forced in. Tobacco smoke can affect all of these. You will need to know the 3 harmful substances found in tobacco smoke, their properties and their effects. Chronic bronchitis is inflammation of the trachea caused by blockage. There will be persistent coughing to get rid of the mucus. This coughing will lead to emphysema, which is the breakdown of the alveoli. So emphysema is more severe than bronchitis.
Aerobic respiration generates carbon dioxide, and its removal is known as excretion. Excretion is the removal of metabolic waste products from the body, as they can be toxic. Another metabolic waste generated, which we learnt about, is urea, and it is excreted by the kidneys. You will need to recognize the kidney and urinary bladder, as well as not mix up the ureter and urethra. A single functional unit in the kidney is the nephron. Take note that the blood vessel going into the nephron is an arteriole. The renal artery goes into the whole kidney. Important parts of the nephron are the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule, which are the sites of ultrafiltration, the convoluted tubules and loop of Henle, which are the sites of selective reabsorption, and lastly, the collecting duct. Due to the high blood pressure of the arteriole, the leaky blood capillaries in the glomerulus, and the narrower lumen of the arteriole exiting the glomerulus, it creates a scenario like a person grabbing onto a leaking hose, whereby water and small molecules such as nutrients and waste will be filtered out, while larger molecules and red blood cells will not. Water will be reabsorbed back from the tubules by osmosis, while other nutrient molecules will diffuse back in the earlier part of the tubules and be actively transported in the later part. The collecting duct is where a hormone known as ADH will exert its effect, controlling the amount of water being reabsorbed. Metabolic waste will not be reabsorbed. And here's the summary of ultrafiltration and selective reabsorption. This green molecule is a nutrient molecule or non-excess water. It will first undergo ultrafiltration and travel down the proximal convoluted tubule. It will undergo selective reabsorption back into the blood capillaries and be transported out through the vein. As for waste and excess water, they will also undergo ultrafiltration, but instead of getting reabsorbed back, they will travel to the collecting duct and get drained out from the kidney. If a kidney is damaged, waste cannot be filtered out, and the patient will have to undergo dialysis. Blood is drawn from a patient. Dialysis fluid contains no waste and has a similar nutrient content to the patient's blood. Dialysis fluid flows in the opposite direction to the flow of blood. The dialysis membrane is partially permeable so that small waste molecules can diffuse out, while larger cells remain in the blood. Waste molecules will diffuse out while there is no net movement of nutrient molecules. The concentration of waste molecules will decrease, but since the flow of dialysis fluid is in the opposite direction, the concentration gradient remains steep to speed up diffusion. And here are the summary and properties of a dialysis machine.
Deciding how much water to flow out of the collecting duct is part of homeostasis, which is the maintenance of a constant internal environment. Homeostasis is achieved through negative feedback. When a body condition rises above normal, a sensing organ will detect it, then signal the control center, which signals the regulatory organ to invoke a change that will cause the risen parameter to return to normal. Likewise, the opposite will happen if the body condition falls below normal, and a negative feedback brings about a response that has the opposite effect to the change detected. You will need to be familiar with the homeostasis of water potential, blood temperature, and blood glucose level. Water potential is controlled by the hormone ADH. When water potential in the blood decreases, it will stimulate the hypothalamus to signal the pituitary gland to release more ADH, which will cause the collecting ducts to become more permeable to water, and more water will be reabsorbed. The reverse occurs when water potential in the blood increases, resulting in less ADH being released, and the collecting ducts reabsorbing less water. More water will then flow out into the ureter. Another location where you excrete water is through the skin to regulate body temperature. This is a cross-section of the skin. While you do not need to recognize each component, you will need to know the function of each of those parts. The hypothalamus will detect changes in the temperature of the blood. When there is a decrease, it will trigger the necessary negative feedback to reduce heat loss and increase heat generation from the body to return the body temperature back to normal. Likewise, when the temperature of the blood increases, which is mainly due to slower heat loss to the surroundings, the body will signal the appropriate organs to trigger the necessary negative feedback. Lastly, you will need to know the maintenance of blood glucose level. To put it briefly for now, the pancreas can detect an increase in blood glucose level and release insulin to the liver, which will cause the blood glucose level to decrease, while a decrease in blood glucose level will cause the pancreas to release glucagon to trigger the negative feedback of increasing the blood glucose level back to normal. Both insulin and glucagon are hormones.
So, what are hormones? Hormones are chemical substances produced by an endocrine gland and released into the blood. They are then carried by the blood to target organs and cause alterations in the activities of those organs, something like a messenger. Hormones are then destroyed in the liver. Here are the hormones that you will need to know. ADH, which you have learned, and insulin and glucagon, which will be discussed next. Other hormones will be mentioned in the final topic. What are endocrine glands? Endocrine glands are groups of ductless cells that release hormones into blood capillaries. The islets of Langerhans in the pancreas are the endocrine component of the pancreas. But take note that the pancreas also has a duct, which releases enzymes into the small intestine. The pancreas releases hormones which regulate blood glucose levels. When blood glucose level increases, the islets of Langerhans will detect the increase and release insulin. Insulin will trigger the liver and muscles to increase glucose uptake and metabolism, as well as convert glucose to glycogen and increase respiration. This negative feedback will cause blood glucose to decrease back to normal levels. For the reverse, when blood glucose level decreases, glucagon will be released to trigger the negative feedback to raise blood glucose level back to normal. A person who is unable to control their glucose level might be suffering from type 2 diabetes.
Oh yeah, since my wife subspecializes in diabetes, you will get cute comics down here.
Pikachu, you are an electric type. Charmander, you are a fire type.
What about me? I'm Snorlax.
It says type 2. Type 2 diabetes. Oh dear, you need a diet.
So, type 2 diabetes is the constant high blood glucose level caused by insulin resistance or insufficient insulin production. Obesity, old age, genetics, and lack of exercise can increase the risk of a person developing type 2 diabetes. Symptoms of diabetes include the presence of glucose in urine, prolonged wound healing, and easy fatigue. Treatment, as mentioned in the comic, is that Snorlax needs to control its diet, and if that doesn't help, Snorlax will need to get insulin injections.
Besides controlling the body through hormones, our body is also controlled by our nervous system. Our nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, which form the central nervous system and the nerves. It is important to note that the brain perceives feelings such as pain and can ultimately stop the actions of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is able to trigger a response and is where you find the relay neurons, while nerves help to transmit nerve impulses to the spinal cord and brain. You will learn two nervous pathways. For some voluntary actions, which are actions you think about and initiate, it starts from the brain, which transmits impulses through the motor neurons to the effectors or muscles to carry out the action, such as clicking the like button on this video. For other involuntary actions and reflex actions that do not go through the brain, it starts with a receptor receiving a signal. Information will be transmitted by the sensory neurons to the relay neurons in the central nervous system. For a reflex arc, it will be transmitted directly to the motor neurons instead of the brain, before the nerve impulse is transmitted to the effector. You will need to know the physical appearance of the neurons. For sensory neurons, the cell body is at the end, while for relay and motor neurons, it is at the start. If we take a person and look at their spinal cord, it will look something like this. Let's look at a voluntary action first. For example, your dog comes to lick you. This information is transmitted to the spinal cord and then to your brain. Your brain then transmits impulses to your hand muscles to pat your dog. How about a reflex action? If you suddenly get bitten by a dog, your pain receptors trigger a nerve impulse, which travels through the sensory neuron, through the relay neuron in the spinal cord, then immediately to the motor neuron before going to your leg muscles to pull away. This is a shorter pathway compared to the path going to the brain first. However, just take note, even for reflex actions, each time a nerve impulse reaches the spinal cord, the information is transmitted to a relay neuron that travels to the brain, as well as the relay neuron connected to the motor neuron. It is because the relay neuron transmits to the brain that we perceive the pain. And because information is sent to the brain can actually send signals to override the reflex action, such as not dropping a hot cup of coffee, even when our muscles have the urge to. One of the more common reflex actions occurs in the eyes. You will need to know the side view of the eye. There are the rectus muscles responsible for moving the eyeballs. Here are the other parts of the eye responsible for refraction and detection of light. Mainly the lens and the optic nerve, which is a sensory neuron. The part responsible for reflex action is the iris, which consists of circular muscles, which are circular and radial muscles, which form the radius of the iris. The pupil is the hole that allows light to enter the eye. The size of the pupil is controlled by the pupil reflex. In bright light, the circular muscles will contract while the radial muscles relax. The pupil will become smaller, reducing the amount of light entering to prevent damage to the photoreceptors. In dim light, the circular muscles will relax while the radial muscles contract. The pupil enlarges, allowing more light to enter so we can see better in low light. Similar to other reflex actions, there is a stimulus, in this case, a change in light intensity. A receptor detects the change, and a nerve impulse is sent through the sensory neuron, the optic nerve, to the relay neuron in the brain. After the relay neuron, the nerve impulse is transmitted through the motor neuron to the effectors, which are the muscles in the iris. Focusing in a way can be a voluntary action. The important parts for focusing or accommodation are the ciliary muscles, suspensory ligaments, and the lens. When focusing on a distant object, the ciliary muscles will relax. This stretches the suspensory ligaments connected to the lens, causing the lens to be pulled and become thinner and less convex. As a result, light is refracted to a lesser degree. For a nearby object, the ciliary muscles will contract. This causes the suspensory ligaments to slacken and the lens to become thicker and more convex. As a result, light is refracted to a greater degree.
Besides internal control, our body is often exposed to external threats such as infectious diseases. Infectious diseases can be spread from one person to another. This is caused by bacteria or viruses. This is different from non-infectious diseases, which cannot be spread. Infectious diseases can be spread through droplets in the air, direct contact, or contaminated food that we ingest, all of which contain pathogens. Examples of pathogens are viruses and bacteria. You will need to know their structures, just like how you know your animal and plant cells. Note that a virus is a non-living thing, while bacteria are living and contain a cell wall similar to that of plant cells. Besides the structural differences, the symptoms caused by pathogens can differ as well. The two diseases that you will need to be familiar with are influenza and pneumococcal disease. One is the common flu, while pneumococcal disease is more associated with problems of the lungs, such as breathing difficulties. There are common and different symptoms, and for flu, everyone watching this should have personal experience with it. For remedies, the effects of infection from viruses can only be reduced by vaccination, while for bacterial infections, vaccination helps in prevention and antibiotics help in treatment. Vaccination works for both types of pathogens, as vaccines contain an agent that resembles the pathogen. This stimulates white blood cells to produce antibodies. These white blood cells retain a memory of producing these antibodies, and during an actual infection, they will be able to produce the suitable antibodies immediately to tag the foreign bodies for phagocytosis. Antibiotics work differently and only act on bacteria. They disrupt the formation of the bacterial cell wall, leading to death by osmosis. Overuse of antibiotics, or not completing the full course of antibiotics, can cause bacteria to develop resistance to antibiotics, meaning that the antibiotics will no longer be effective against them. The remaining bacteria, being more resistant to the antibiotic, survive and are able to reproduce. Through mutation, some offspring may become even more resistant, and after a few more generations, bacteria resistant to antibiotics may develop.